Greetings and salutations, viewers. Welcome to another episode of Game Break. I am Charles, coming to you today with another episode of Cursed Sight. Last time round, things went a little sideways. The king apparently had enough with, West Taria, and decided to try and kidnap the queen, because, that always works. Didn't quite turn out the way he wanted, despite Miyon's prophecies. Just as how their evening didn't quite turn out the way they wanted, despite Miyon's prophecies. We are now down a Sasa, which sucks. She was a fun character and the parental figure of the trio, which means childhood is over. It's time for these two to step up in some way, shape, or form into adulthood, for better or worse. If Guy is effectively 18, more or less at this point, that would put Miyon at a close age range as him, so effectively teenagers being forced into adulthood because war. Hey, that never happens. How about we jump right in and see just how Miyon takes it, and where do we go from here? The second I walked in, I thought Miyon would pounce at me and demand to know what happened. Instead, I found her laying on the floor. Her heavy breathing told me she had not simply fallen asleep. I crouched beside Miyon and slipped a hand under her veil. Her forehead felt warm enough to boil an egg. She must have been holding back this fever since the morning. I should have checked up on her before I left. As I rose to get help, Miyon held onto my sleeve. Guy. Hearing Miyon say my name normally made my day. This time round, the world felt like a claw ripping down my neck. Tell me Sasa's okay, Miyon asked. Tell me. Now I knew how that guard felt when I forced him to confirm Sasa's death. I opened my mouth but failed to produce any words. So long as I kept quiet, I felt as if there might still be hope. Miyon bit her lip, and I knew she had already figured it out. But I saw her alive and well in my vision. Did those spoiled apples anger the goddesses? My first thought was to try and defend myself. That pretty much exposed me as the filth that I was. If blaming each other could bring back Sasa, I would argue with Miyon until my throat tore to pieces. Did my blunder really ruin the ritual? If so, no amount of apology would suffice. With tears brimming, I brushed off Miyon's arm and fled the room. After telling a servant to call the doctor, I locked myself into the nearest toilet and bawled. I hoped nobody sat in the other cubicles, or they would hear me for sure. By the time I came out of the bathroom, afternoon had already settled in. I missed several cleaning duties, but lucky for me, Locke had bigger issues to attend to right now. That night I returned into Miyon's room and found her asleep on the floor. If she wanted to yell at me until sunrise, so be it. Anything to at least lift her spirits a little. It killed me to see her sweating under a blanket like this. The towel on Miyon's head had dried up, so I dunked it into the water bowl next to her. When Miyon got sick as a child, Sasa would stay overnight to watch over her. I thought Miyon might have even fainted feigned sickness a few times so Sasa would stick around. None of this would ever happen again. I put the towel back onto Miyon's forehead, knowing the duty now belonged to me. Memories of Sasa kept playing in my head. If I forced them to stop, I feared one day I might forget her face. That guard said Sasa's entire family perished in an explosion. Aside from Miyon and I, there was nobody left around to mourn her. Judging from the smears on Miyon's cheeks, I knew she had been crying all afternoon. The sight of those tear marks made me want to weep again. If I could shed her share of tears, I would gladly do so until I turned blind. I snapped from my trance when I noticed a figure standing on the veranda. Absorbed in thought, I had failed to see him until now. Crap, how long had he been standing there? He looked to be a boy around my age when I had first arrived in this temple. The flower patterns adorning his blue attire suggested he hailed from West Taria. Assassin? He donned shoulder plates just like the ones Westarian soldiers wore. If this boy belonged in the army, he must be the youngest member yet. Even his clothes seemed several sizes too big for him. In the past, seeing someone from my home city might have excited me, but East and West Taria were at war. Did this guy come to assassinate Miyon, the treasure of East Taria? For one thing, I knew he had zero interest in the likes of me. I spotted a blade tied to the boy's belt. Maybe I should call the guards for help, but running now would mean leaving Miyon alone with this guy. If I yelled, he might become agitated. Please, Sasa, lend me the strength to become Miyon's knight. This room had no weapons for me to use, so I pulled the towel off Miyon's head and waved it around like a blade. The Westarian snickered at me, and to be honest, I could hardly blame him. Miyon staggered out of bed. She must have woken when I took that towel off of her. If this guy came to assassinate Miyon, could he have picked another date? Give us at least one day to mourn for our loss. Miyon stepped in front of me, showing more poise than I managed to muster. I wanted to take a step forward, but my legs jittered and froze me in place. Chill out, I only came to deliver a message, the Westarian said. His voice sounded like it belonged to a child, so I confirmed my suspicions about his age. The Westarian pointed to Miyon. East Taria will continue to use you for the war, but know that in the West we have a treasure of our own. Did he mean somebody in West Taria also possessed the cursed site? Back when I lived there, I had never heard of such a person. There will be endless bloodshed if you remained here, the Westarian said to Miyon. 3 nights from now, I'll wait for you in the forest outside Melody Way. There's someone who will be keen to meet you. The Westarian leapt over the railing and vanished into the shadows. With the boy gone, I folded my arms and grunted in an attempt to act tough. Yeah, you better run away. I'll go, Miyon said, paying zero attention to my cool act. This smells like a trap no matter how you look at it. I clasped Miyon's arms. A trap for West Taria to possess your powers. Miyon lowered my hands. That boy speaks the truth. There's indeed another person out here with the cursed sight, and she's been tampering with my spells. That's why your powers have become unstable? Miyon nodded. I need to meet this person. In recent years, Miyon's spells did appear to be faltering. We thought her powers might be on the decline, but now we knew the real reason. Miyon's fevers after each ritual must be worsening, too. If the Westarian kept resisting Miyon's spells, they might wipe each other out. Did this mean the Westarian was responsible for Sasa's death, too? I clenched my fists as I imagined pounding this person's face into jelly. Miyon leaned forward and tapped her hat against my chest. I'm sorry for blaming you about Sasa. If I were more capable, she could have been saved. I'm only good at causing death and destruction. You're letting that Westarian's words get to you, I said. Miyon shook her head. I've killed even my parents with the cursed sight. By the time people figured out how my powers worked, so many more had already fallen. On my first day in the temple, Miyon had supposedly killed a child who had flipped her veil out of curiosity. His mother had been executed partly by Miyon's hands as well. It's not your fault. I could think of no other empty words to say. Out of all the servants, Miyon referred to only me by name. I thought that meant I understood her best, but nights like these reminded me that I in fact knew nothing. If Miyon wanted to escape from this temple, I had no right to get in the way. Compared to freedom, my company meant nothing to her. In the end, I was but another servant. Time to run away. 3 days had passed with Miyon and I barely exchanging words. The more we spoke, the more it would hurt when the time came for us to part ways. At least, the moment for Miyon to escape had arrived. This temple had been holding her captive since childhood, but her sentence would end tonight. As I opened the doors into Miyon's room, a part of me still wished she would change her mind. I even considered jamming the corridor with a stack of tables to block her in. This could all be a trap from Westaria, and most important, I wanted to keep Miyon to myself. I entered Miyon's room to find her pacing around the carpet, looking anxious to carry out her plan. Sasa, please watch over us. Please watch over her. I had thought hard about what to say as farewell. 100 ideas crossed my mind, yet now I stood here in silence. Anything I said would just become another burden on her. She was already carrying enough of those on her shoulders. I poked my head out the door to check for guards. As I had predicted, the corridor looked clear. Having served here for so long, I knew exactly when the guards liked to sneak in their naps and cigarette breaks. I gave Miyon the signal, and she tiptoed out of her room. Miyon trotted down the corridor faster than I had ever seen her move. This would be the last I saw of her, so I burned the sight into my memory. My tongue froze, preventing me from saying a word, but I at least whispered goodbye in my mind. Miyon peered over her shoulder. Having been around her for all these years, I could feel her impatience just from the way she cocked her head. She waved me over like a pet that had fallen behind during a walk. If Miyon had wanted me to join her, she could have told me beforehand to avoid all this heartache. Maybe the thought of telling me made her blush, or perhaps in her mind, me coming along seemed as natural as the sun rising at dawn. In this temple, the king disposed of servants as casually as I took out the garbage. Miyon's gesture made me feel needed again. Once she turned her head, I let my lips curl into a grin. As we fled, Miyon kept glancing over her shoulder, as if worried I might stop following her. What a silly thought. Miyon hurled fruits at me over the smallest things, but she also kept my days interesting. I had nowhere else to really go. Miyon and I arrived at the temple entrance. A pair of guards stood by the doors, barring our path to freedom. These two usually snuck out for a beer at this hour. They just had to pick today to act so diligent. Miyon hid behind a pillar with her shoulders slumping so much I feared they might fall off. I locked fingers with her and pulled her out of hiding. After letting go of her hand, I marched toward the guards. Miyon tugged onto my sleeve as she trailed me. "Keep your head straight," I said. Once I drew close enough for the guards to hear us, I spoke in a loud voice so they could hear. "Get a move on. King Locke wants us back by midnight." Miyon let go of my sleeve and grunted. "Relax. If anyone slows us down, I'll make sure the king knows about it." I resisted the urge to smile. For someone who never went out, Miyon had some serious street smarts. I knew she would catch on and play it cool. The guards stepped out of their way, allowing us to squeeze right past the gates. They mumbled to each other as we passed them. Thank the goddess these goons were too stupid to figure out our lie. Once Miyon and I reached Melody Way, I strutted along with my head held high. First, Miyon showed she needed me around, then I managed to pull off a stunt like this. The glory got to my head, and I let out a chuckle. "That only worked because they're too afraid to speak up against me," Miyon said. "Well, you do have a scary temper." Miyon glanced toward an apple tree to the right, as if contemplating whether she should pick a fruit and throw it at my forehead. Lucky for me, she decided against it and walked on. Come to think of it, those two guards we fooled might end up being killed by Locke for their blunder. The realization made me feel guilty for ever celebrating. We passed several villagers in Melody Way, but none of them approached us. In fact, they all swerved away to keep their distance. Miyon seemed unfazed, but I could only imagine how much it broke her inside. Miyon and I left Melody Way at last. With no patterns to light our path, we trudged along the bush road in darkness. As tree branches crunched beneath our shoes, I felt Miyon's arm brushing against mine. The trees enveloping us had twisted branches that resembled broken arms. This place reeked of mud, and with ravens croaking all around, I actually missed those ringing bells from the village. I wanted to make some manly vow about protecting Miyon, but I probably shivered worse than she did. In the distance, I could hear the growling of beasts. At this rate, we might be eaten by predators before the Westarians could spring any traps on us. A breeze whistled by, and after a sneeze, I turned to Miyon. "Are you cold?" Miyon shook her head. "Your nose is running." I should have stolen some spare cloth from the temple on my way out. Once Miyon looked away, I quickly wiped a sleeve across my nose. Gross, but it beat eating snot. Leaves rustled in a bush to the side. Miyon yanked me away from the noise before I could do the same for her. It had better just be some rats crawling past. Anything bigger would have to face my broomstick of fury. Hold on. Crap! I left my broom in the temple, too. A flock of baby birds scattered from the bush, and I confessed I jumped more than Miyon had. Way to be a knight, Sir Guy. A pair of figures emerged from where the birds had fled. One was the Westarian from 3 nights ago. That... Let me guess. One of them is his sister. My money's on one of them being his sister. It's gotta be. Beside him stood a girl in a blue dress decorated with flowers. The guy did say someone wanted to meet me on here, so he kept at least that part of the promise. The girl standing before us donned a veil much like Miyon's. If it served the same purpose, that meant she too possessed the cursed sight. She must be the one who had blocked Miyon's powers and allowed Sasa to die. With my hands coiled into fists, I stomped towards this witch, but the other Westarian jumped into my path. I invited the girl here, not you. Before I could argue, Miyon responded. My name's Miyon, not girl. Guy's my most trusted companion. If he's unwelcome here, then I'm leaving as well. I pounded a fist against my chest. That's right. I am her most trusted companion. Miyon elbowed me in the ribs, knocking that swagger right out of me. Still, my heart pounded over those words she had uttered. Her most trusted companion? I wondered if Miyon's cheeks were flushing under that veil. Miyon whispered into my ear, That girl has power similar to mine. I can sense it simmering within her. Her name is Zolu, not girl, the Westarian boy said with a smirk. Right back at you. Did this guy see himself as some kind of wisecracker? More like an ass-cracker if you ask me. No need to be aggressive, Neek, the girl named Zolu said. Judging from her voice and height, she must be no older than 10. From this point on, Mistress Miyon and Sir Guy are our friends, Zolu said. Never before had I been addressed in such a polite manner, but it would take much more than that to win my forgiveness. Okay, so Zolu and Neek, not his sister. Huh. Zolu lowered her head at Miyon, who returned the greeting. I resisted the urge to yank Miyon's head back up. This girl's the reason Sasa's gone. There's no need to treat her like royalty. We came here to get away from violence, Miyon said, her tone exhausted, as if speaking to a child. In the past half hour, she elbowed my ribs and wanted to throw an apple at me, but sure, peace, got it. The Westarian boy gripped his sword's hilt. Zolu referred to him as Neek, so I should start doing the same. You can't touch Zolu if you tried, Neek said to me. I sense no aura coming out of you. According to fairy tales, warriors could detect each other by their auras. Could the rumors be true? If so, Neek must be one of the strongest around. On the other hand, Miyon had me by her side. Legend said I once broomed the entire temple in a single afternoon. Nobody ever dared mess with me. Neek began to unsheath his blade. If you keep disrespecting Zolu, the baby birds from earlier soared back into the scene. This time, they brought their parents with them. The bird started pecking Neek, pulling his hair as if they were worms. He did scare away the baby birds just to make his grand entrance, so he probably deserved it. Hey, what the? Neek unsheathed his sword and swung it at the birds. The blade slipped off his butter fingers, almost slicing off his leg in the process. Oh boy. Zolu waved her arms at the birds, and they at last scattered off. Zolu stroked Neek's back to calm him down. She covered her mouth a second late, and I caught her giggling. No need to hide it. I, for one, laughed so much I could no longer breathe. Miyon, thank you for punching my arm to calm me, or I might have choked to death. Neek picked his sword back up. Enough fooling around. Let's head back to camp before those birds come back. Neek and Zolu walked off along the bush path. That Neek might be a clown, but I must nonetheless raise my guard. This could all still be an act, and we might be stumbling into a Westarian trap. Miyon stood still for a while, but eventually followed Neek and Zolu. With a snort, I trailed the three of them up to a campsite, the one Neek and Zolu had supposedly set up earlier. Miyon sat onto the grass beside the campfire. She stretched her palms out toward the flame and let out a long breath. Looks like she too had been struggling against this cold. Miyon gestured me to sit beside her, and I did as asked. Inside this freezing tent, the flames felt as pleasant as resting on Sasa's lap. She used to let me do it once a year on my birthdays, so I would know. Neek walked into the tent erected near the campfire and came out carrying a flower-patterned towel. Here, he said, placing the towel over a patch of dirt near the fire. Zolu sat on the towel to avoid dirtying her dress. Jeez, Neek's gentleman meter almost reached puke level. Once Zolu settled in, Neek seated onto the dirt beside her. Zolu turned to face Miyon. I too have fled from Westaria's temple, Mistress Miyon. I have no wish to oppose you any further. Doing so would only destroy us both. You're a little late, I said. Miyon pinched my finger in an attempt to stop me, but I spoke on. Thanks to you, Sasa is dead. You killed our closest friend. Our only friend. Zolu surged to her feet with quivering lips, her body shielding the moonlight behind her. Had I gone too far with my words? This whole time I'd been stressing over Neek and his sword. I had forgotten Zolu could put me in a body bag just by lifting her veil. But instead of doing that, Zolu dropped onto all fours as if paying tribute to a goddess. I'm sorry. Really, really sorry, Zolu sobbed. Miyon folded her arms at me as if I had been the bully. Zolu and Miyon both had the cursed sight, but they sure acted differently. Miyon would never break down like this, but it made me think. Perhaps she was bottling just as much guilt inside of her. Unfortunately, we're going to have to find out just what these two cursed sight people are going to do next time. We're already out of time for this episode, but this is escalating. Both sides now have a fortune meddler, but both fortune meddlers have left their sides and met. This could go so many ways. How do you neutralize the cursed sight so they are no longer wanted without harming them? Because it's never easy. Otherwise, someone probably would have tried by now. We're going to have to find out just how all of this boils down next episode. Until then, hit that subscribe button so you can come back next week and see all the other shiny things that we toss up on our channel. And, as always, go be creative. Go play some video games, go enjoy some other people's stories, and go create some stories of your own so you can share them with others. And I will see you all next time.